Today, we're going to trace the journey of a political slogan. You know, the kind you hear at a rally. We're going to see how it travels from the stage all the way down the supply chain and ends up having a very real impact on your wallet, especially if you're trying to buy a house.
It all starts with a line just like this one. It's powerful, right? It's simple, it's tough, and it gets a huge round of applause. It paints this picture of total self-reliance, that we can go it alone. And that's a really appealing idea.
But here's the big question we're digging into today. What actually happens when that applause line stops being just words and gets turned into official government policy? The domino effect is, well, it's probably not what you'd expect. All right, so here's our roadmap. We'll start with that applause line, then we'll look at the reality of the supply chain. After that, we'll trace the ripple effect in the US, see how Canada made a really smart pivot, and wrap it all up by looking at where real economic strength comes from.
Okay, let's jump right in. This isn't just about some off-the-cuff remark. We're talking about a very specific, very real policy tool, tariffs. And in the case of US-Canada lumber, this is a story that goes back decades.
So, the official terms are countervailing and anti-dumping duties. It sounds complicated, but think of them as legal tools a country can use if it thinks another country is cheating, unfairly helping its own industries. These duties are the mechanism, the gear that connects the political rhetoric to an actual cost paid at the border.
And you know what? The effect isn't slow. It's not gradual. The shockwave from a decision made in Washington hits construction sites across the country almost instantly. Builders see the cost of their materials jump, sometimes overnight.
And that brings us to part two, the part that doesn't usually make for a great soundbite, but is absolutely crucial to understanding this whole thing. Let's talk about the boring reality of how deeply connected our supply chains really are. Just look at the numbers. Historically, about 30%, that's nearly a third of all the softwood lumber we use to build homes in the US, comes from Canada. This isn't just a little bit of extra supply, it is a massive, structural part of the American housing industry. So you have these two totally different ways of seeing the world. The political slogan pushes for independence, this idea that we can make everything we need right here. But the economic reality is interdependence. For all practical purposes, North America is one giant integrated system where lumber flows back and forth across the border to wherever it's needed most efficiently. So you might be thinking, well, why can't U.S. mills just step up and fill that 30% gap? It's just not that simple. Most U.S. mills are already running pretty close to their maximum capacity. Finding enough skilled workers to add more shifts is a huge challenge. And hey, you can't just snap your fingers and build a new sawmill. That's a multi-year project. It's not a light switch. All right, on to our third section. Because when you choke off a major part of your supply and domestic producers can't just fill in, that cost has to go somewhere. The question is, who ends up paying for it? The journey of this cost is incredibly straightforward. It's like a hot potato being passed down the line. The importer gets hit with the tariff at the border. They have to pass that cost to the distributor. The distributor passes it to the home builder. And the home builder, they have no choice but to bake that extra cost right into the final price tag of a new house. And here is where it gets really, really real. That price increase might not seem like a lot in the grand scheme of a house, but even a $1,000 jump can be the difference maker. It can push the price just high enough to disqualify tens of thousands of families from being able to get a mortgage. So you see, what starts as a high-level trade dispute in Washington, D.C. doesn't stay there. It becomes a deeply personal, pocketbook story for families who are right on the edge of being able to afford their first home. Every single dollar matters. But the U.S. homebuyer isn't the only one who feels this. The policy forced Canada to react, and their response, well, it's a fascinating look at how to turn what seems like a major weakness into a source of long-term strength. I mean, just look at the contrast here. While the U.S. was focused on the tariff, Canada was playing chess. They said, okay, if our biggest customer is going to be unreliable, we need other customers. They started aggressively marketing to Asia and Europe. They invested in making their mills more efficient, and they started shifting to more advanced, higher-value products. They played the long game. And here's the brilliant part. Every single time Canada signs a new long-term deal with a company in Japan or Germany, it does two things. It makes them less dependent on the U.S. market, and it gives them more leverage for the next time they sit down at the negotiating table. What started as a vulnerability slowly becomes a strength. Okay, this brings us to our final section, where we pull all these threads together. Let's talk about what a more stable, a sturdier path forward might look like, one that's based on reality, not rhetoric. If there's one core lesson here, it's this. Economies don't care about great speeches. They operate on supply and demand, logistics and constraints. And when policy is based on the magical thinking that you can just wish away a third of your supply with no consequences, the economy will eventually send you the bill.
So what does a smarter approach look like? It's about being pragmatic. First, negotiate a stable, predictable, long-term lumber agreement so everyone knows the rules. At the same time, invest right here at home in training our workforce and helping U.S. mills modernize. Fix the transportation bottlenecks that make it hard to get lumber where it needs to go. And maybe, just maybe, innovate together with our partners.
And that brings us to this final thought, which really sums it all up. The old idea of strength was about building walls, about being an impenetrable fortress. But maybe, in the 21st century global economy, real strength looks different. Maybe it looks more like a well-built, efficient, and resilient network. And so that's the question I want to leave you with. In a world that's only becoming more connected, where do we find our true economic advantage? Is it in trying to wall ourselves off, or is it in the hard work of building smarter, stronger, and more reliable connections with our partners?